Welcome to Video 3, How Singapore Became a British Trading Post. In the last video we looked at Temasek and why early Singapore already mattered in the region. Now we are going to look at the event that changed everything, 1819. Why did the British want a new port? Why did they choose Singapore specifically, out of all the places they could have picked? Who was Raffles and what exactly did he do? What was the Treaty of 1819 and why did it matter? And why did Singapore grow so fast after it became a British trading post? These are the questions this video answers. This video is for Singapore Secondary 1 students studying how Singapore became a British trading post. If you are preparing for a test or exam on this topic, this video covers everything you need: the causes, the key people, the Treaty of 1819, the effects, and the historical significance. By the end, you will be able to answer questions on why the British wanted a new port, why Singapore was chosen, what Raffles did, what the treaty achieved, and how Singapore grew. Let's begin. Here is our plan for today. We start with why the British wanted a new port at 1:30, then move to why Singapore was chosen at 4. Raffles's role at 7:30, the Treaty of 1819 at 9:30, growth after 1819 at 11, historical meaning at 13, and practice and recap at 14. Use these timestamps to jump to any section you need. Now, let's get into it. By the early 1800s, the British were one of the most powerful trading empires in the world. They had enormous trading operations stretching from Britain to India, and they wanted to push further into Southeast Asia and onward toward China. Southeast Asia was not just a route, it was a destination. It sat between India and China, two of the biggest trading economies in the world. Huge quantities of goods, spices, silk, tea, tin, cotton, flowed through the waters of this region. Whoever controlled the sea routes here controlled the trade, and the British were not willing to be left out. They wanted a strong base in the region that would let their ships operate freely, protect their traders, and give them a foothold in some of the most commercially valuable waters on Earth. There was one major problem, and its name was the Dutch. By the early 1800s, the Dutch had established control over many of the key ports and sea routes in Southeast Asia. Their presence meant that British ships operating in the region had to deal with Dutch tolls, fees, and restrictions. It made British trade in Southeast Asia more expensive, more complicated, and more dependent on Dutch goodwill. That was not a situation the British were comfortable with. Trade competition, rivalry between countries for control of trade, was fierce in this era, and the British were determined to find a way around Dutch dominance. They needed a port of their own, somewhere they could trade freely without asking the Dutch for permission. So what were the British looking for? The ideal port would need to be somewhere near the major sea routes so ships could easily stop there. It would need a safe harbor where ships could anchor. It would need access to fresh water so crews could resupply. And ideally, it would need to be somewhere where British entry was politically feasible, not defended by a powerful ruler who would resist. Raffles was the man sent to find this place. He was a senior British official with extensive experience in Southeast Asia, working for the British East India Company. He had the knowledge to identify the right location and the authority to act, and his search led him to Singapore. The first and most important reason Singapore was chosen was its strategic location. Strategic location means a place has advantages because of where it is, and Singapore's location was extraordinary. It sits at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, right at the entrance to the Strait of Malacca, the narrow sea passage between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra. This strait is the main corridor connecting the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. Every ship trading between east and west had to pass through or near it. Singapore was positioned right at the southern entrance of this corridor. Any ship coming from India and heading toward China, or coming from China and heading toward India or beyond, would pass by Singapore. Raffles immediately recognized this. The location was simply too good to ignore. But strategic location alone was not enough. The British also needed a place where ships could actually stop safely and restock. And Singapore provided two further practical advantages. The first was a natural harbor. Singapore had sheltered water close to shore where ships could anchor safely without being battered by rough seas. Multiple ships could anchor at the same time, which was essential for a busy trading port. The second advantage was fresh water. This might sound simple, but fresh water was critical for long sea voyages. Crew members needed drinking water. Ships needed water for various practical purposes during the voyage. Running out of fresh water at sea was a serious and potentially fatal problem. Singapore had freshwater sources on the island, which made it a very practical stopping point for ships that had been at sea for weeks. The fourth reason Singapore was chosen was the local political situation. Political situation refers to the condition of local power and rule in an area. In 1819, Singapore was part of the Johor Sultanate. But the Johor Sultanate had been weakened by internal disputes. There was serious uncertainty about who should rightfully be sultan. There were rival claimants to the throne, and this created a power vacuum and a degree of political instability on and around Singapore. Raffles used this situation skillfully. He recognized and supported Sultan Hussein, one of the claimants, as the rightful sultan, which gave Sultan Hussein both legitimacy and British backing. In exchange, Sultan Hussein and the Temenggung, a local Malay chief who had day-to-day authority over Singapore, were willing to negotiate with the British. A stronger, more stable political situation might have made entry much harder. The political weakness made it possible. Let's bring those four reasons together, because in your exam, you will often be asked to explain why Singapore was chosen, and you need to be able to give more than one reason. Reason 1, strategic location near major sea routes. Reason 2, natural harbor providing safe anchorage. Reason 3, fresh water for ships and crews. Reason 4, a weak political situation that made British entry and negotiation easier. These four reasons did not work independently. They worked together. A great location means nothing if ships cannot anchor safely. Safe anchorage means nothing if there is no water. And even if all three physical advantages are present, a hostile political situation could still block the British. It was the combination of all four factors that made Singapore the right choice. Now let's talk about Raffles more specifically, because he is one of the most important figures in Singapore's history, and you need to understand exactly what he did. Stamford Raffles was a senior official of the British East India Company, the powerful company that managed British trade and colonial interests across Asia. He had spent years working in Southeast Asia, including a period as Lieutenant Governor of Java. He was knowledgeable, ambitious, and politically astute. He saw Singapore's potential when others had overlooked it. He made the decision to choose Singapore as the site for the British trading post. He initiated the negotiations with the local rulers, and critically, he championed the idea of making Singapore a free port. Without Raffles, the British might have chosen a different location entirely. He was the key decision maker. Raffles' decision to make Singapore a free port was one of the most consequential choices in Singapore's history. A free port is a port where goods can be traded with few or no taxes. At the time, most ports in the region charged merchants significant fees and taxes every time they brought goods in or out. This was normal practice. Raffles decided Singapore would not do this. Instead, Singapore would be open. Any trader from any country could come and trade freely without paying heavy fees. Why was this smart? Think about it from a merchant's perspective. If two ports offer similar geographical advantages, but one charges you significant taxes and the other charges you almost nothing, which one do you go to? Every rational trader would choose the free port. And that is exactly what happened. Singapore's free port status became one of the single biggest drivers of its rapid growth. Let's pause here and check what you have learned so far. 3 questions. First, give 2 reasons why the British wanted a new port in Southeast Asia. Second, give 3 reasons why Singapore was chosen as the site for the trading post. Third, what did Raffles mean when he said Singapore should be a free port, and why was this a particularly smart decision? Pause the video now, think through all three questions carefully, and write down your answers. Then unpause to check them. Here are the model answers. The British wanted a new port for two main reasons. First, to protect and expand their trade in Southeast Asia, and second, because Dutch control of key routes and ports was making British trade more difficult and expensive. Singapore was chosen for at least three reasons: its strategic location near major sea routes, its natural harbor which gave ships safe anchorage, and its supply of fresh water for resupply, with the weak political situation as a fourth reason that made British entry easier. A free port means trade with few or no taxes. This was smart because traders from across the region would naturally prefer a port that cost them less. The free port policy is what turned Singapore from a convenient location into an irresistible one. On the 6th of February 1819, Raffles signed a treaty that formalized British presence in Singapore. There were three parties to this agreement. First, Stamford Raffles, representing the British East India Company. Second, Sultan Hussein, the claimant to the Johor Sultanate whom Raffles had recognized and supported. Third, the Temenggung, a senior Malay chief who had practical authority over the Singapore area. Under the terms of the treaty, the local rulers agreed to allow the British to establish a trading post in Singapore. In return, the British agreed to pay yearly sums of money to both Sultan Hussein and the Temenggung. It was, at its core, a deal. The British gained permission and legal standing. The local rulers gained financial support and British recognition. Both sides got something they needed. Why did the Treaty of 1899 matter? Three reasons. First, it made British control official. Before the treaty, Raffles was just a visitor. After the treaty, the British had a formal, written agreement giving them the legal right to operate in Singapore. Their presence was formalized, recognized, and accepted by the local authorities. Second, it allowed the trading post to actually begin. Without legal permission, the British could not legitimately build structures, set up administration, or invite traders. The treaty unlocked all of that. Third, it set the stage for Singapore's rapid growth. Once legal permission was secured, Singapore could openly attract merchants, workers, and settlers. It could be advertised as a safe, legitimate, tax-free trading port. The treaty was the foundation that everything else was built on. And grow it did. After 1819, Singapore expanded at a remarkable pace. The free port policy was the engine of this growth. Traders from across Asia began arriving almost immediately because Singapore offered them something invaluable: a safe, well-located port with no taxes. Chinese merchants from Fujian and Guangdong came. Indian traders from the Coromandel coast came. Arab merchants from the Gulf region came. Malay traders from across the archipelago came. European company traders came. All of them were attracted by the same thing: free trade in a well-located port under stable British administration. Within months of 1819, Singapore was already a busy trading port. Within a few years, it was one of the most active ports in the entire region. Raffles had been right about Singapore's potential. It exceeded even his expectations. The rapid growth of trade also triggered rapid growth in population. Migration, the movement of people from one place to another, accelerated quickly after 1809. People came to Singapore for work. A busy trading port needs laborers to load and unload ships, merchants to buy and sell goods, craftsmen to build and repair, and a whole range of service workers to support them. The numbers tell the story clearly. Before 1819, the island had around 1,000 inhabitants. By 1821, just 2 years later, the population had grown to around 5,000. By 1824, it had reached over 10,000. Within 5 years of the treaty, Singapore had gone from a lightly populated island to a diverse, growing town. Chinese, Malay, Indian, and European communities all established themselves. The trading post was becoming a real place, with real people building real lives. Let me show you how all of this connects as a cause and effect chain. Dutch competition created the need for a new British port. That need led Raffles to look for a suitable location. Raffles identified Singapore. The Treaty of 1819 was negotiated and signed. The free port policy was introduced. Traders and merchants arrived in large numbers. Workers and migrants followed the traders. Population and port activity grew rapidly. And within a few years, Singapore had become a major regional port. This is causation in its most complete form. Each event caused the next. If you remove any link from this chain, the outcome changes. That is what a complete causal explanation looks like. Not just one cause, but a connected sequence. What does 1819 mean for Singapore's history? Here is the key distinction. 1819 was not the beginning of Singapore's history. We already know from video 2 that Temasek existed for centuries before Raffles arrived. Singapore had a name, rulers, and a role in regional trade long before 1819. But 1819 was a turning point. A turning point is a moment when things change significantly and permanently. After 1819, Singapore was connected much more strongly to global and regional trade. British administration was introduced. The population grew at a pace that had never happened before, and the direction of Singapore's development was set for the next 200 years. When you are asked in your exam about the significance of 1819, do not just say it was when Singapore was founded. Say it was a major turning point in a much longer story, and then explain why. Let me give you a practical tool for your exam. Your resources include a paragraph frame for the question. Explain why Singapore was chosen as the site for the British trading post. The frame goes like this. Singapore was chosen as a British trading post because... Then your overall reason. One reason was that it had a strategic location near major sea routes. Another reason was that it had a natural harbor and fresh water, which made it useful for ships. The local political situation was also weak and uncertain, which made British negotiation easier. Therefore, Singapore was a good choice for the British trading post. This is a complete, structured paragraph. Download the paragraph frame from the description, practice filling it in your own words, and you will have a solid answer ready for any exam question on this topic. Let's close with a recap of everything we covered. 1. The British needed a new port to protect and expand trade in Southeast Asia and to counter Dutch dominance of the region's sea routes. 2. Singapore was chosen because of its strategic location near major sea routes, its natural harbor, its fresh water supply, and the weak local political situation that made British entry easier. 3. Raffles was the key decision-maker. He identified Singapore, negotiated the treaty, and championed the free port policy. 4. The Treaty of 1819, signed with Sultan Hussein and the Temenggung, gave the British legal permission to establish the trading post. 5. After 1819, the free port attracted traders from across Asia, migration followed, and Singapore's population grew dramatically. 6. 1819 was a major turning point in Singapore's history, not its beginning, but the start of a new and transformative phase. Before you go, here is what to do next. Complete your guided notes, which have 11 fill-in-the-blank sentences covering everything from this video. Try the practice quiz with 12 questions. Fill in your exit ticket with 4 short answers. And download the paragraph frame. Practice writing it in your own words until it feels natural, because questions on why Singapore was chosen come up very frequently. All of these resources, plus the Raffles fact sheet, the treaty summary sheet, and the cause-effect chart are linked in the description below. If this video helped you understand 1809, please like it so more Sec 1 students can find it. Subscribe for weekly Sec 1 history videos. Leave a comment telling me which part surprised you most, and I will see you in video 4. See you there. No voiceover. YouTube end screen with soft background music at 10 to 15% volume. End screen displays links to video 2, Early Singapore, and video 4, Life in Colonial Singapore, with a subscribe button. .e